As we get closer and closer to the transfer portal officially opening, we continue to get more and more names that have announced their intention to enter as soon as it does. And some of the names that we have recently gotten are the most surprising yet. So in this one, I'm going to be breaking down all of the new names that have announced they will be entering the transfer portal and where I think they could end up. So now, let's jump into it. But let's start with a move that has actually already happened, and that's because Tennessee moved fast and got a really good one with the commitment of Tyler Lundblade. And Lundblade was one of the best shooters in the portal the second he became available. And after winning Missouri Valley Player of the Year at Belmont this past season, the Vols made sure he stayed in state. Lundblade averaged 15.5 points per game, shot 43% from the field and 40% from beyond the arc, and he knocked down a conference-leading 115 threes. And I'm a bit surprised how quickly he committed to the Volunteers, because I thought there was a real chance he would follow his coach to Kansas State, but in the end he went with Rick Barnes in Tennessee and should be one of the best shooters in the SEC next season. And on a Tennessee team that already wins with their defense, adding a player who can stretch the floor like this gives them a completely different element offensively, and I truly believe he is going to be one of the key pieces for this Tennessee team next season. But from there, we get to a name that has already dominated the headlines everywhere, and that's Flory Bidunga from Kansas. And Bidunga entering the portal is one of the biggest developments of the entire offseason, because this is not just a normal transfer move. Bidunga now has 3 very real options on the table, as he can go to the NBA, return to Kansas once again, or cash in somewhere else as one of the most valuable big men in all of college basketball next season. And there have already been reports that his asking price is around $5 million to return to school next year, but as of now, he is probably the best big man that will be available in the portal this cycle. And on the floor, he is an elite defensive anchor, a game-changing rim protector, and the type of center who can completely alter a team's identity with his presence around the basket. And Kansas obviously has to do everything it can to keep him, but if he truly becomes available in the portal, every major program in the country is going to be involved, and the two that pop for me right now are Michigan and Duke, who will both need bigs next season and were a part of his top 4 when originally being recruited. But another big program just lost one of their key pieces, and that's Karter Knox, who is going to be leaving Arkansas. And it's really interesting to me because the production was solid from him this past season and the talent is obvious, but it still feels like there's another level that he is just not fully reached yet. The 6'6" wing averaged 8 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 1 assist this season, while shooting 46% from the field and 38% from 3 before an injury cut things short for him in February. And he was productive again after averaging over 8 points per game as a freshman with Arkansas, and that matters because it shows this was not just one random stretch of play. And Knox has size, scoring ability, and enough shot making to fit on a lot of high major rosters, but with Arkansas bringing in more talent at his position, this feels like a move toward a bigger opportunity somewhere else. And in a weaker upcoming NBA draft class, it makes a lot of sense for him to transfer somewhere he can expand his role and try to play his way into that conversation like he was last offseason. And he originally committed to Kentucky before Coach Cal left and followed him to Arkansas. And then there's another SEC team in Auburn who was originally involved in his recruitment, so I could see Karter Knox staying in the SEC but playing elsewhere. And there was another SEC player that just recently entered the portal, and that's Jasper Johnson from Kentucky. And he is one of the more intriguing buy low, high upside players in this cycle because the talent is still clearly there, even if his freshman year at Kentucky never fully went as we expected. The 6'5" freshman averaged 5 points and 1.5 assists in limited minutes with the Wildcats, and he shot 40% from the field and 34% from 3, but his role became inconsistent once SEC play began, and that lack of rhythm showed up in his production, especially against high-level competition where the opportunities were more limited for Johnson. But still, there were flashes that were there, including a 22-point performance that showed exactly what he can be as a scorer when given the freedom on that end of the floor. And this is a player who has proven he was an offensive weapon at the high school level and originally was projected as a one-and-done prospect, but now, instead of heading to the NBA, he is going to be resetting in the portal, and if he lands in the right system with a more defined role and given more usage, Johnson definitely has the tools to become one of the bigger breakout guards in his sophomore season. And his style of play just makes me think teams like Alabama and Louisville, who both actively recruited Johnson out of high school, could be interesting landing spots for him next season. But Johnson wasn't the only Kentucky Wildcat to enter the portal recently, because big man Brandon Garrison also just announced that he will be entering the transfer portal as well, and the 6'10" junior could be one of the most coveted big men in the portal once it opens, especially with the upside that he brings. Garrison originally transferred to Kentucky from Oklahoma State in Mark Pope's first season with the Wildcats, but in year 2, his role didn't necessarily take the jump that I originally thought it would. He averaged just 4.5 points and 4 rebounds in 16 minutes per game this season, and consistency has been his issue for the most part. But now, entering the transfer portal will give Garrison the ability to see if he can tap into his potential elsewhere, and he will likely eye a starting opportunity in his final season of eligibility. And honestly, I could see him heading back home to Oklahoma State, but with his potential, I could also see a lot of other programs reaching out. But one of the more fascinating names in the portal right now is Terrence Hill Jr. from VCU, because he has already showed he can completely swing a game against major competition. He averaged 15 points, 3 assists, and 3 rebounds this season at VCU, while shooting 46.5% from the field and 37% from 3, and he went out and dropped 34 points against North Carolina in the NCAA tournament to lead VCU to getting the upset against the Tar Heels, and that game is what made a lot of people take a second look at him. But the bigger story is that he was one of the most complete impact players in the A10 all season long, earning first team all A10 honors, defensive player of the year honors, and most improved player of the year honors, and also being recognized as one of the best 6 men in the entire country. And that kind of two-way value is hard to find, and the fact he is keeping the door open to returning makes this one especially interesting. But whether he stays or he goes, high major programs are absolutely going to be pushing hard for him, but my gut tells me that he will once again be at VCU next season. But one of the biggest names that you're going to hear of from the portal is going to be Juke Harris, and he is a monster portal name because there are not many 6'7" wings in college basketball who can score at all 3 levels the way that he can. This past season, he averaged 21.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, and 2 assists at Wake Forest, and was named the ACC Most Improved Player and scored over 750 points, which is the second most in a Seagull season in program history at Wake Forest. He had 17 games of 20 or more points on the year and exploded for 38 against Boston College, and what makes that leap even crazier is that he averaged just 6 points per game as a freshman, and that is not normal improvement. That is star level growth that we have seen from Juke Harris, and now he is testing the NBA draft waters while also entering the portal, which means if he comes back to college, he could immediately be one of the most sought after players in the country. He has the size, shot creation, IQ, and versatility, and he feels like exactly the kind of player that could walk into a top tier offense and become one of the faces of the sport next season. And to me, he feels like the perfect replacement to Otega Owe at Kentucky next year, but the Wildcats will definitely not be the only team calling. But now, one of my favorite players to enter the portal is Khani Rooths from Louisville, and he might be one of the more intriguing long-term bets for teams because the tools are absolutely there. At 6'10", he is a good athlete, a capable defender, and a player who can impact the game physically, even if the jump shot is still inconsistent at times. At Louisville this year, he averaged 5.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 1 assist in just under 16 minutes per game, but he had 8 double-figure scoring games, including a 20-point outing in the season opener for the Cardinals. And this is the type of player where the box score may not scream star today, but the frame, the way he moves, and his defensive potential just makes me believe the right coaching staff could unlock a lot more out of him. And if he lands in a system that lets him grow offensively while still leaning into what he already does well defensively, he could be one of the best portal players that we see next season. And some places where I think he could end up would be Maryland, because he is a Washington, D.C. native, so a return home could be a logical option, but then also maybe even in Indiana or even in Arkansas, because I would love if he could develop under John Calipari. But someone that just entered the portal that I think could be a star potentially in college basketball is Ace Glass, because he feels like one of those freshmen who enters the portal and instantly becomes a priority for a bunch of major programs because the production, the age, and the upside all line up for him. At Washington State, he averaged 16.5 points, 3 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game while shooting 45.5% from the floor and 36.5% from 3, and he earned second team all WCC and all freshman team honors. He made 71 threes this season, and what stands out is that he looks comfortable both on and off the ball, which makes him easy to fit into almost any backcourt. He was once committed to Texas A&M, but then Buzz Williams left for Maryland and ended up at Washington State, and now with 3 years of eligibility left, he is the kind of player who could become a high major star if he lands in the right spot. spot, and it is easy to see why people are already talking about him as one of the better young guards in the portal. And some of my favorite landing spots for Glass would be Gonzaga, since he's already there in Washington. I think Maryland could also be an option, as he was previously committed to Buzz Williams, and I could even see him going back home to either USC or UCLA there in California. But another freshman that has just entered the portal is Jalen Haralson from Notre Dame, and he is one of the best young players to have hit the transfer portal so far. And if you are looking for a freshman with real star upside, this is one of the names at the very top of the list. At Notre Dame, he averaged 16 points, 4 rebounds, and a team-leading 2.5 assists per game, while shooting an impressive 51.5% from the field in his first year of college basketball. And what makes Haralson especially valuable is that he is 6'7", 220 pounds, and not just a wing scorer. He can handle the ball, attack downhill, make decisions out of the pick and roll, and create for his teammates. And that kind of size and skill combination is exactly what high-level programs want to build around, which is why this is such a brutal loss for the Fighting Irish. He was a top 20 overall recruit for a reason, and now programs like Indiana and Michigan State are two that I'm eyeing as being interested in him because they were involved in his recruitment in the first place. But as big as Haralson's departure is, somehow he is not even the only major Notre Dame loss we have to talk about, because the Fighting Irish's best player, Markus Burton, is also reportedly entering the portal, and this is a huge deal because when he is healthy, he's one of the most dangerous scoring point guards in all of college basketball. Over 69 career games at Notre Dame, he has averaged 19 points, 3 rebounds, and nearly 4 assists and 2 steals, while shooting 44% from the field, 33% from 3, and 85% from the free throw line. And he only played 10 games this season because of a left ankle injury, but even in that limited sample size, you could still see how much he changes the ceiling of that team. Notre Dame was 7-3 before things unraveled after he got hurt, and Burton's speed, scoring burst, and ability to create offense are what stands out the most. And if he gets a medical red shirt and has 2 years left, that only increases his value in the portal, because you are not just adding a proven scorer, you are potentially adding an elite lead guard for more than 1 season on your team. Indiana feels like a very logical team to watch here, but honestly, a lot of programs should be involved in Burton's recruitment. But Notre Dame wasn't the only school that lost 2 players to the portal recently, and that's because 2 players also hit the portal from Providence. And starting out, I want to talk about Oswin Erhunmwunse, who is one of the top big men in the portal now, because he does exactly what winning teams need from him, because he's a rim-running, shot-blocking, glass-cleaning center. The 6'10" sophomore averaged 7 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 blocks this season, while leading Providence in both rebounds and blocks, and his overall 2-year production shows a player who consistently impacts the game with both energy and a physical presence. He is an athletic big who lives around the rim. He protects the paint at a high level and gives you an identity defensively the second he steps on the court. And with Providence moving into a new era under Brian Hodgson, this kind of move is not shocking, but it absolutely matters because there are not that many portal bigs who can alter shots and control the glass the way that Erhunmwunse can. And he may not be the kind of player you run your offense through, but he is exactly the kind of player contenders look for when they want to get tougher and more reliable on the inside. But I do think there is a possibility that Erhunmwunse could remain at Providence next season, but there are definitely going to be a lot of high major programs reaching out on him. But maybe even a bigger loss for Providence is Jameer Jones, who is going to be entering the portal, because Jones is one of the most lucrative young wings that we see right now in the portal, because the freshman production that we saw from him was real. He also had great efficiency, and the upside is obvious. He averaged 12 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game, while shooting 57% from the field, and those are incredibly strong numbers for a 6'6" freshman in a league like the Big East. And he also showed he could do it against serious competition, putting up 23 points against Villanova and 20 points against UConn, which matters because it proves the production was not just coming in soft spots around their schedule. He was a Big East all-freshman team selection for a reason, and now that he is available in the portal, you can expect a lot of major programs to ramp up their pursuit of Jones. And this feels like one of those recruitments where contenders are going to circle quickly, because the combination of his age, size, and the natural scoring ability that he brings is hard to find. And he chose Providence over Ohio State, Houston, and Kansas in his original recruitment, and I wouldn't be surprised if any of those teams are the ones reaching back out. But the most surprising player to have entered the portal recently to me is Cade Phillips from Tennessee. Tennessee because Phillips entering the portal is less about the huge production that he brings and more about what could have been if injuries had not interrupted his development with the Volunteers. And he was expected to take on a bigger role at Tennessee this past season, and in the short stretch before going down, he had already started 9 games before a shoulder injury ended up ending his year in December. But across his 3 seasons with the Vols, his role had steadily grown, and there was a real path for him to become an important front court piece for them next season. And at his best, he gives you size, rim protection, and defensive activity, and with the likelihood of a medical redshirt, that makes him even more interesting because a new program could be getting a player with real experience and potentially more runway than people realize. And I would not rule out a return to Tennessee being in the picture still for Phillips, but this feels like a situation where connections like Justin Gainey, who just got the NC State job and was a former Tennessee assistant coach, could become very relevant, but he's also such a solid big. I think a lot of other teams are going to be in the mix. But the last player I want to mention entering the portal is Isiah Harwell from Houston, and although his numbers weren't the best with the Cougars this past year, the pedigree and flashes that we saw are still enough to make major programs believe there's a lot more in there. He averaged just 3.5 points and 2 rebounds in under 14 minutes per game with the Cougars, while shooting 28% from the field and 27% from 3. So there is no way to pretend the freshman season was productive overall, and that was pretty surprising considering he was a top 15 recruit out of high school. But there were moments where you could see that his upside was there and why he was so highly regarded as a recruit. He hit double figures 3 times and showed that when the jumper is falling, he has a chance to become a real offensive weapon. And sometimes a player just needs a different fit, more freedom, or a bigger role to exceed, and Harwell feels like one of the best examples of that in this portal cycle. But he was also recruited by Texas and Cal out of high school, but my favorite fit is actually Gonzaga, and I think that would be one place where he could definitely exceed under Mark Few. But now that we are just a few days away from the transfer portal officially opening, I think we're going to continue to see more and more players entering, and I'll continue to cover each and every one of them. But if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.